NaVIC or navigation with Indian Constellation has been in the news. The government of India has asked smartphone manufacturers that all the smartphones sold in India should be NaVIC compatible. But first, what is NaVIC? I'm sure most of you know what it is. But anyway, NaVIC is India's own homegrown navigation system. It's like the GPS, which belongs to the US. NaVIC essentially comprises 8 satellites, and they pinpoint locations for users in India and over a region of 1,500 kilometers from India's borders. NaVIC has been in operation since 2018. It has been serving the military very well, and in some respects people say it is better than the GPS because it's more precise in its location, which means it can take you to within 5 meters of your target, whereas GPS would do something like 20-25 meters. And NaVIC is also designed to help people like fishermen. They will be able to see or find out where the Indian border ends on the seas. They will be able to locate shoals of fish floating around and so on. Essentially, it is India's own GPS, but with a limited range. But as I said earlier, NaVIC has been in the news lately because last month the government of India has asked the smartphone manufacturers to make their phones NaVIC compatible, which means if you take your phone like this and you want to find a location, today you go to Google Maps. In future, when all the smartphone manufacturers also have NaVIC, there will be a NaVIC app, and NaVIC app will do just the same functions. But making the phones NaVIC compatible essentially means tweaking of hardware, mainly making some changes in the chipsets, and this technically people say is going to be costly, and therefore the smartphones sold in India will also be correspondingly costlier, and understandably the smartphone manufacturers are not particularly happy about this. But looks like they will comply over a period of time. The chipset manufacturers Qualcomm and Mindtech have said they will bring in NaVIC compatible chips, which means some of these Chinese manufacturers, Chinese phones, Xiaomi and Redmi will have NaVIC compatible phones. Samsung and Apple probably could take some time, but experts by and large are of the view that it's only a question of time before all the smartphones sold in India are NaVIC compatible. Do we need a NaVIC? Don't we have GPS? Isn't it serving us well? And isn't it available to us free? Yes, these are pertinent questions. The government of India was kind of driven to a situation where it had to think of an indigenous navigation system like the GPS when in 1999 in the Kargil war, India requested the US government to share some details about the location of enemies on the mountains, which unfortunately the US refused to, and that triggered a thought perhaps that we should have our own navigation system and not depend upon others. And India initially tried to collaborate with the EU, which has its own navigation system called the Galileo. By the way, India is the 6th country to have its navigation system. The US has GPS, Europe has Galileo, Russia has GLONASS, China has its own WIDOW, and the Japanese have what they call QZSS, and India joins these ranks. So India thought it is absolutely necessary to not depend upon another country for something as critical as this, and therefore we have developed our own navigation system. The idea for this NaVIC, as I said, had its genesis in the Kargil War of 1999, and after a brief experimenting with Europe, which as I said has its own Galileo navigation system, in 2005 Indian government decided to drop the idea and go all on its own, and these 8 satellites were supposed to be put up in the skies by 2011 at a cost of about $174 million. but due to various reasons, technical mostly, that didn't happen, and it wasn't until 2018 that ISRO tried to send 9 satellites, one of which failed at launch, another failed when it is up there, and therefore we have a constellation of 7 satellites. And it is learned that ISRO is ready with a couple of backups, so they can be sent up at any time. But of course, this is only for the starters. Over time, India has ambitions to go global, like the GPS, and all other systems are global. And India also wants to have a global navigation system, which means today if you have your smartphone is NaVIC compatible and you go to, let's say for example, Australia or the US, NaVIC won't work there because it will work only within 1,500 kilometers of India's borders. But over time, maybe several years from now, India's NaVIC will work anywhere in the world. For that, of course, India needs to have several more satellites. To give an illustration, when the US started GPS, it had a constellation of 24 satellites, but in order to aid accuracy, they sent a few more, and now they have about 30 or 31 servicing this setup. So India also needs to have an equivalent number of satellites, something like 30-35 satellites. Only then will it be completely global in coverage. That presumably will happen over time. But for now, there is a NaVIC system that is operational, and that is serving the military armed forces and some other applications quite well. And now it's the government of India's intention to bring it to the smartphones, and looks like it will happen, perhaps not immediately, but give it 3 years, 5 years, it will happen. And in future, we will be using our own navigation system. After all, India is now becoming more and more self-reliant in many areas. We have built our own aircraft carrier, the INS Vikrant. Tejas, of course, is a very good example of indigenously developed weapon systems, light combat aircraft. And very recently, India also had developed, and the Army and the Air Force inducted India's own HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, manufactured light combat helicopter, Prachanda. With all these things happening, it's only a question of time when India has its own navigation system also.